Welcome to the June 25th, 2019 episode of Reactive Consciousness, our in-depth podcast about what happened this week in our lives. I'm your host, vysethebold, and this is...
OldManStompy.
And Dracologist. Good evening.
I'm used to going second.
Oh, false start!
Must restart. Please late.
I'll be honest, I was sitting waiting for a snarky reply when you inevitably screwed up the opening, but you managed to get through with aplomb, and I look like the fool now.
I don't think I screwed up at all, did I?
Nope.
No, it was.
Good job.
It was a clean shot. It was.
Unless it was you're too embarrassed to say that I screwed up, but you wouldn't be too embarrassed to say.
Yeah, for one, I would not be too embarrassed. I would even go so far as to say I was meticulously scanning the script to check for any errors, and yet I found none.
Right. It was.
I was gonna say you wouldn't hold back. You wouldn't hold back in telling me how callously I deserve to restart. But no, we have another really great episode here. These next two episodes, the Reactive and CoreCon this week, are going to be traditional, thankfully. So we have a whole lot less to talk about, but that's a good thing in these cases, so we can enumerate on things. But last couple of weeks were just so jam-packed full of like E3 and like post E3 stuff. So thankfully we have much breadth of time in order to talk about each topic this time around.
Yeah.
But there's still plenty to talk about.
Yes.
So
Now it's time for half an hour of Xbox backwards compatibility.
Yeah, so basically
actually, we'll never need to talk about that ever again, because unless they start it up again magically sometime in the future. But I did want to give OldManStompy a platform to speak about wrestling and magic. Who knew? Those are the things that he likes to talk about. But there were some significant events in those worlds, and he is our expert, and it's always a pleasure listening to him. So please do enumerate on the subjects that we have at hand here.
Sure, and feel free to interrupt. I hope this won't take too much of the episode.
Yeah.
We never interrupt each other on this podcast.
We cannot interrupt each other. Honestly,
Lotus isn't here, so it'll happen half as much.
I'm waiting for a moment when Magic the Gathering releases a new set with wrestlers in it, and OldManStompy blows his mind.
Oh, actually, there was a professional wrestler praying mantis who was released in one of the comedy sets late last year. The special ability was
that's just a one-time joke, and it's over.
Nonetheless, the depiction of professional wrestling, I thought was fantastic. I mean, it's hard to do there was also a not a joke set, but a set intended for casual play called Battle Bond that was all about arena fighting, and that's about the closest that you're probably going to get to like American style professional wrestling, which has no real analog in high fantasy. So it had cards called like bonus rounds and like cards about appealing to the crowd. Lots of like really off the cuff. Yeah, lots of theatrics. A lot of the stuff that's at the core of professional wrestling.
Honestly, I always thinking that with all the special moves and things, you could actually make a Darkest of Dungeons with a wrestler character.
I would say that. I would actually say, and I've made this comment before, that wrestling faces, especially in the WWF, are basically anime protagonists in the way from like a Sailor Moon or a Dragon Ball Z style anime, because the narrative structure is really similar. Like a wrestling match, you like everything else, all the details of the match are largely irrelevant. They're just setups for the signature moves and the finishing move. It's just like a Kamen Rider show, or a Sailor Moon show. Like everything that happens all the way up to the very end, you know, it's always going to end with them using their finisher, unless it's the end of like a season finale, in which case the finisher will probably fail, and they have to come up with a new like super finisher, which is exactly what happens all the time in wrestling.
It's actually kind of funny that you brought those up, because I just started reading the original Dragon Ball manga this week. What ended up happening was on another podcast I was listening to, they mentioned the fact that you can join the Shonen Jump app on like Android or iOS. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but like for $2 a month you have the entire you have access to the entire like up to date manga releases for all the Shonen Jump manga. That's like really impressive, like especially if you want to start reading One Piece, which is the reason why I wanted to do it. And I also had some interest in Dragon Ball and One Punch Man, so I went ahead and did that. It's $2 a month. I mean, then I don't have all those volumes lying around after I'm finished with them and all that stuff. So I thought that was pretty cool.
I didn't know that, but I'm also not surprised, because like a lot of the major comic retailers have already tried to set up a service like that, where like a big chunk of their backlog is available. So
but $2, that's really good. I mean, that's basically free.
At least $100, but that's not really not much. At the same time, I'm not a really big manga reader. Honestly, I never read one, so it's not my.
I've actually found that I watch more manga, or I read more manga than I watch anime anymore. Just because I feel like I could get through things a lot quicker. Number one, and number two, there's no bullshit in manga unless you're looking for it. You know what I mean? Like
filler. There's plenty of bullshit in anime. Like, let me tell you.
You know what I meant. I meant filler. Like
there's shonen show, then it's probably going to chock full with fillers.
Yeah. There's a far less waste of your time. Let's put it that way. Especially concerning like the really good stuff. Anyway, so I've been enjoying that, because I was reintroduced to the fact that Oolong is the original bad guy of Dragon Ball. He was the first villain of Dragon Ball, which is kind of funny.
Guy?
No, the pig, the shape-shifting pig.
Yeah. Oh well.
I think you're thinking of Poir.
Right. Dragon Ball Z, the original Dragon Ball was kind of charming in its own crazy, silly way, but I don't remember much of it. Dragon Ball Z to me is lost cause.
Yeah.
Like it was like on the comparison of wrestling, at least of wrestling matches goes for a limited time, not 500 episodes.
Well, speaking of, let's get back to OldManStompy's platform here that we hijacked.
No, we can continue to talk about Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. That's very topical.
No. Let's talk about wrestling. Wrestling can be funny. Also, before we start, just wanted to ask that I think I give the link to Lotus, but did you see Little V's made a song for Kenny Omega, Battle Cry?
Sorry, could you repeat that? Something about Kenny Omega?
Yes, he has a new theme called Battle Cry from the YouTube musician, the guitar hero Little V.
Oh,
Willis.
okay. Nice. I will have to check that out. Again, we're going to be talking a little bit about Kenny Omega, but not that aspect of him. So
he's probably a cool guy, but boy, he has a little bit of a Chunga syndrome.
He's an interesting guy.
he looks a little bit. Anyway, carry on, please.
Anyway, so today I'd like to talk a little bit about the latest developments in All Elite Wrestling. So that's the promotion founded by Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, Cody Rhodes, and football billionaire Tony Khan, the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, who has provided most of the money and the finance behind the project. The big, stunning revelation was that they're actually getting a television show. Like, most people expected them to try to get a TV show, since the TV is usually what's used to sell, the big pay-per-views and, build up for it and build a,
That's exciting.
A fan base. Yeah. Not only are they getting a TV show, but it's on TNT.
Oh, and that's a big network. That's a mainstream
TNT.
network.
Yes. Oh, obviously it's an American channel, so that is probably irrelevant to you. But
that's another Turner network, isn't it?
Yes, the reason it's significant is because, and it's actually really funny that this happened. On Reddit, there's a guy who's been reposting like the history of the war between WCW and the WWF, and he got up to like exactly at the time that they made this announcement. He was recapping the part of the history of the final folding of WCW, which happened when, as a companion partnership with Turner Broadcasting, so Turner Broadcasting had merged with AOL Time Warner. And as part of pushing Ted Turner out of the executive responsibilities for the new merged company, they were going to cancel WCW because it had flagging ratings. So at the exact same time that, like, as online, purveyors of wrestling history, we were sort of reviewing the loss of wrestling on TNT and the consolidation of the WWF as the only major wrestling company in America. Now this announcement comes out that another billionaire has come out of nowhere to finance a new wrestling company and manage
it's on the same channel.
Yeah, wrangle this contract with TNT. Vince McMahon must be having fucking flashbacks. He must be infuriated.
Good.
I'm all for that. I'm very happy. Anytime he's mad.
Yeah, I am not remotely sympathetic for Vince McMahon. The guy's a gigantic piece of shit. I hope he has a fucking heart attack over this. Yeah.
To release the world from his grip, but we're not that lucky.
Waiting for the moment that it gets that old, like Ric Flair, that if someone body slams him, then all of his bones get polarized.
Vince is older than Ric Flair.
Holy shit!
But by a large amount.
Oh, not a large amount. I think Rick is 70 and Vince is like 73 or 74.
Oh, okay. Contemporaries
that's
almost.
Not that much then. Actually,
so the big difference between the two of them, and the only reason that Vince might look younger at times, because they're both complete maniacs.
I'm sure they were both heavily into coke at the same time.
I'm sure. So there are some interesting stories about Vince, including that when he does a cheat day on his exercise routine, he says that he thinks that the human body can only absorb so many calories. So on his weekly cheat days, he will eat an entire cheesecake or an entire box of Oreos, and he'll just feel like shit the next day and puke it all back up again. So and that's on top of all the.
You ever see Amadeus, where the emperor, or the emperor of music, or whatever, the guy who played Rooney in Ferris Bueller? He's just there just were too many notes. There's only so many notes a human can hear. He's telling Mozart this, by the way. They probably the most famous, Western music composer ever made, ever born, ever made. Yeah, ever to live, I should say. So,
sure. Anyway, the only reason that Rick probably looks a little bit more shrunken than Vince does is because Ric Flair actually got into a plane crash in his younger days. He used to be built like a truck. He used to be a giant. He was huge. He was pushing. He looked like not quite as big as Brock Lesnar, but he had that kind of physique. And in the plane crash, he broke his back, and he just never could keep that much muscle on his body. So it totally changed the way that he wrestles, and he manufactured his new personality as the jet-setting dirtiest player in the game, as the kind of character that he cultivated in the years after that, partially as a result of his inability to play the muscle-bound face anymore.
Yeah, so he had to be a cheater to win, essentially, right?
Well, he just had to be a smaller guy. You never really expect so the faces are almost always the better technical wrestlers, and the heels almost always have to cheat to win. And when the Rick being smaller than everybody else, most of the time you'll look at the two guys across the ring from each other and assume that Rick is the smaller guy and the less believable, even if he technically is a fantastic wrestler.
Sure, he was one of the most technical, one of the best technical wrestlers of his day.
Well, he was great at ring psychology. I don't even want to say that he was great in terms of the moveset that he knew compared to a lot of people from Mexico or Japan.
Oh well, Mexico's a whole nother game, if you ask.
Well, but there used to be.
That's even more ceremonial, even more. How do you call it?
Aerobics, or I would say acrobatics. I meant.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. So anyway, so All Elite has had two now really big pay-per-views. The first one was called All In, and it was a shocking success. I think we covered it during a previous episode of the podcast. The next one was called Double or Nothing. The main event was a repeat of Chris Jericho versus Kenny Omega, which was also played out in New Japan about a year and a half ago, I think, for the New Japan United States title. So because the other major promotions that aren't WWF are generally speaking allowed to, refer to each other as a shared continuity, and the WWF is the business that pretends like all of that never ever happened unless they personally own the intellectual property from like folded companies. That means you have this like rich ecosystem of matches that take place all the way across like the independent sphere into like different countries and different like systems of wrestling, and they can be referred to each other as part of a continued feud, which tends to make the stories a little bit richer. It also just means that to some extent you're making up for the fact that you don't have a television show to like play all these stories out in front of a consistent audience, so you kind of have to like loop all these things together. This is probably their last show before they actually begin the brand in earnest. So they have a show coming up at the end of the month that's called Fighter Fest. If that sounds familiar, it's actually like a parody of Fyre Fest, which, for those who weren't following the news, was a disastrous music festival that took place, I think, last year. It was. I don't know. Do you remember hearing about this in the news?
No.
So look up Fyre Fest. It was a music festival on an island, I think in the Caribbean, where the guy sold million.
Oh, I saw the documentary on this. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a Netflix documentary on it. It was just it turned out to be like completely fraudulent. People went there like billionaire.
It was a snake oil salesman kind of situation. Yeah.
And it was just trash. There were no accommodations. There was no like plumbing. I think
the famous picture from it was like the dinner that they were served, which was like 2 slices of bread and a piece of cheese.
I heard something of some sort of fraudulent party like that, but I don't know the details, sadly.
So I don't want to go too much into detail about it right now. Just know that since wrestling is a carny business, it makes total sense for Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, who are like the quintessential internet wrestlers, to use it as a main to promote their next really big show. And their advertisement is just like basically a take on the original advertisement for the Fyre Festival. And I'm sure it'll be good.
It's just like, enjoy the life of luxury, that kind of thing. That was like, how it was billed, like with all the models and all that stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just about which makes total sense because most of the women who tend to get into professional wrestling are also fitness models. So you can have like, the actual wrestlers promote the show, and they'll actually be there, unlike the Fyre Festival where nobody was there. Or nobody wanted to be there after they realized that they had all been taken advantage of.
Oh, jeez.
Anyway, so there are there are a few notes, large and small, that I would have from the show. The one is that they did not yet entirely launch their women's division. They aspire to have a strong women's division. They have Cody Rhodes' wife, Brandy Rhodes, I believe, is in charge of talent promotion for that. So right off the ground, they have one of the founders being like directly invested in the women's division as its own like entity and not as a sideshow of like the men's division as it is so commonly presented in the WWF. So they expect to take it seriously and give it its own time to breathe, like on its own like show that will be dedicated to letting the women compete for what will be hopefully a prestigious championship. They have one of the first trans woman wrestlers to be signed to a major professional wrestling promotion. I think her name is Nyla Rose. I haven't really been following her career prior to this, but it's interesting in the sense that it will, in some sense, normalize the presence of trans women in female athletic competitions, which is has a complicated history in international competition for a variety of reasons that are sort of beyond the scope of us to discuss right now, and probably I could talk about it for several hours. But like previously, when you had women competing. In any sense, a lot of the time, if a woman looked like she was like extremely muscular, they would try to treat her like a man. They like China, they would put her in the men's division, and like they would almost treat her, or like Nicole Bass, who I think you may recall also did some time on the Howard Stern show around the Attitude Era, and they would treat them like sideshow attractions, basically. which is really unfortunate. It meant that like you could not be successful as a female professional wrestler in the big league, so to speak. Unless you're willing to be like a fetish actress or treated like a sideshow, or if you just happen to look like Vince McMahon's ideal of a fitness model, which is usually like very curvy with long blonde hair, and actually pretty small, like not actually very, very built. If you look at like professional athletics, there are women who are like weightlifters who will put like 99.999% of men to shame, including most of the people who wrestle for the WWF.
Oh, sure.
But like very few of those women actually get like legitimate shots at professional wrestling as an industry. One of them is under the WWF. She wrestled as Karma. I forget her stage name. She was also on Glow, the Netflix show, as Welfare Queen. So she's actually a pretty talented actress. She wrestles.
Sure, everybody loved that show.
Yeah, no, that show was great. I'm meaning to catch up on season 3, which was released or is coming out.
My girlfriend was even enjoying it, and she has no connection to this. The sport.
It's a sort of a pseudo documentary too, because Glow was a real promotion in the 80s, and what happened to them is more or less exactly what happened in the 80s when they started the show out of a Gold's Gym in I think Los Angeles. One of the women actually was involved in the same set of lawsuits in California that spawned out of the Rodney King lawsuit. She actually won quite a bit of money. The police invaded a wedding on her house because of noise complaints and committed some violence, and they received a sizable settlement out of that. And she passed away, I think just last year, after living off that settlement for quite some time.
Jesus.
So the history is actually pretty interesting. Anyway.
Oh yeah.
So Karma had a second career after leaving the WWF. She currently wrestles under the name Awesome Kong, which comes across as a little like sketchy because she is like large. She's a black woman. So like having anything that sort of resembles like a name that you might give to like it sort of invokes like King Kong or Donkey Kong, right? So you wouldn't really usually want to. But as it turns out, so there was a fantastic like heavyset women's wrestler from Japan called Asia Kong, which also sounds kind of goofy. But she was like a rock star over there. She has one of my favorite wrestling entrance themes of all time. Like the first lyric is like God made the devil just for fun, but when he made the real thing, he made Asia Kong. It's told like
pretty badass.
It's told like an 80s power ballad. So like her character is meant to be portrayed completely seriously, and I believe that's who she was inspired by and chose her name from. So we'll give her the benefit of the doubt that the name is not like exploitative.
Sure.
Although, however, it might be construed. And like including her in the division, it helps sort of create a greater breadth of images for what it means to be a women's professional wrestler and to be successful. So I'm still rooting for her.
And dinging bells as well.
Yeah, ringing bells. Sure.
That's rings.
So the last and kind of what in the mainstream is the most important thing to come out of the show is Jon Moxley, who previously wrestled as one of the main events guys on WWF under the name Dean Ambrose. He quit after WrestleMania last year, quit from WWF. And almost immediately after that, his contract ran out. So it wasn't like he got fired or he didn't wind up having to deal with like no-compete clauses or having to deal with WWF's legal department when trying to exit and find new work. He left quite amicably. They dedicated several shows to like his exit. And then he showed up at the end of the main event afterwards under his old persona, Jon Moxley, which he had used in the independent scene prior to coming to WWF. And he gave he did the traditional run-in after a match. He hit his finisher on Kenny Omega and Jericho, and generally made a nuisance of himself. And of course, in WWF, making a tremendous nuisance of yourself is a guaranteed way to get yourself inserted into the main event of many pay-per-views in the future. Which I wish that worked in like real life, but it is what it is. So shortly after that, he also issued a podcast because we love podcasts on this podcast. He was on.
You can't mention another one. We'll lose our viewership.
Yeah, they're pretty much any podcast would be a step up from this one.
Oh Jesus!
So I won't name any in particular. All directions are up. So
please go somewhere else.
I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can wait until you leave, and we can talk. We can talk about you behind your back. It's fine. I'm not.
Don't you try. I will find you.
You know where to find me.
Yes.
So about 5 years ago, when CM Punk quit the WWF, he went on to his friend's podcast, Colt Cabana. He had a podcast called The Art of Wrestling, and he basically issued an expose on how shitty he was treated on his way out. He had a staph infection, and he was concussed at some time late in the Royal Rumble, which turned out to be his last match. And he had this whole story about how they just had him run the treadmill for a while, and they didn't really give him any significant medical care. And he felt dizzy. He was like ready to throw up, and they just like kept trying to push him to send him back out there to finish the match. And he just got fed up with it. He walked out after the pay-per-view was over, and we never saw him again. It was one of the most shocking things I'd ever heard of in professional wrestling. That right in the middle of the build to WrestleMania, one of their top stars would just leave, like quit, disappear. And it turned out that he was still under contract. It was quite some effort for him to get out of his contract, but they wound up firing him via fax on his wedding day about 4 months later.
That's like, that's even like less personal than a text. Mm-hmm. It's like the least personal way of communicating ever.
Yeah. So like under normal circumstances, you would just say like, like it was totally by accident. It was just happened to be when his contract was up. But like knowing how fucking petty that Vince McMahon and Triple H are, like I'm not surprised they did it on purpose. And that surely at least one person within WWF was invited to the wedding, so they probably knew exactly when it was. Even if he wasn't necessarily in touch with the higher ups, probably a couple of the like rank and file people who he was friends with, like at least knew when the wedding was happening. So anyway, fast forwarding to last month, Jon Moxley went on Chris Jericho's podcast, and he gave basically the same interview, discussed how he felt like when he was on his way out. So you remember last fall, Roman Reigns, he got cancer, and thankfully he recovered. Yeah,
how he's doing?
He seems like he's doing great. There's actually a minor pay-per-view tonight in which he has been wrestling for quite some time. He's been back for a while, so I guess it's not. It obviously was not severe leukemia. It might be some kind of chronic leukemia that can be settled by an oral. I think the statement was that he was taking oral chemotherapy, and so that seemed to allow him to push the cancer back into remission and to get back into wrestling shape. Only maybe 4 or 5 months after the initial announcement that he had to yield the championship because of his diagnosis.
Brock Lesnar came in and flipped the cancer out of him.
Yes, he surely.
I'm not done with you, boy.
Unfortunately, cancer tends to refuse to stay down. So we'll see.
Yeah.
So Moxley in his interview, he had a bunch of comments about how Vince continually wanted him to use Roman's cancer as part of a storyline, where he would say things to like other wrestlers who had been tied to Roman Reigns about Roman's cancer. As a ways of getting heat onto him. And he said that some of them were so bad that he thought that they would lose him sponsors. Him personally sponsors, the WWF sponsors, and that's like pretty messed up. Like
very tone deaf as usual.
As per usual.
So there's literally no depth to which I believe that Vince McMahon will sink. There was always a statement backstage that Vince had kept Stephanie McMahon, his daughter, on air because he always wanted to do an incest angle, and he just never managed to find the right time to do it. Which is probably for the best because there's like literally never a good time to do an incest angle on network television,
or ever really, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not trying to say that there is. Just like I cannot imagine him walking around thinking that he promotes a show on the USA Network and that he will ever get to do this storyline. I just cannot fathom what sort of brain he has to have.
Yeah, not only that, but a lot of their money comes from like children's events and children's toys and things like that. A huge part of their audience is young children.
So, somewhat ironically, one of CM Punk's most famous promos, it was titled "The Pipe Bomb."
I actually saw that when it aired.
Nice.
Oddly enough,
he mentions, and the microphone is cut off during the promo, but surely this is part of the sketch. There was no way that was not a planned part of it, but it comes across as very authentic. he talks about how like the WWF continually runs ads for like anti-bullying campaigns.
Sure.
Where, in fact, Vince McMahon is the biggest fucking bully on the planet. You know, that's literally his entire personality, both in and out of the ring.
Sure.
So it's not surprising knowing this that Moxley was like super unhappy with like his time, and so he left. He joined both All Elite and he joined New Japan Pro Wrestling. He'll be participating in the G1 tournament, which is like this giant round robin tournament. Probably the most exciting 3 weeks in all of professional wrestling, in my opinion. Where like 20 of the top stars in New Japan, they all go round robin against each other to determine who's going to be the contender at Wrestle Kingdom, which is their WrestleMania in January. And it tends to set up the whole year's worth of feuds, because if you are the champion and you compete, and you lose some of your matches in the round robin, those are all your contenders for the rest of the year. And likewise, if you win the title shot, you have to defend that title shot against everybody who beat you as you were like doing the round robin. So it tends to be like their launching point for all of their storylines going into Wrestle Kingdom. So having Jon Moxley, having the usual spate of fantastic New Japan professional wrestlers, and having him as a bona fide main event WWF star, with all of what that entails, coming unleashed, not having to put up with like all the corporate bullshit and all the restrictions that come with wrestling in WWF, should be like really exciting to watch. I'm very happy about that.
Excellent.
Yep. So that's all I'm looking forward to. The next thing in All Elite, aside from Fyter Fest, which is obviously kind of like a lesser show, like kind of something they did as an in-joke amongst themselves, is called All Out. I don't know, it just sounds kind of goofy to me. I know what they're trying to go for, but like the first show is called All In, and they had like a big casino motif amongst both of these first two shows, All In and Double or Nothing, and they promoted All In by having like all these wrestlers who are normally part of the independent ecosystem. They would all like post on Twitter like, I am all in, and like it basically marketed itself. So like, are they gonna say like, I'm all out? Like, no, you're not.
No, you're all in. We know your number.
Like all the puns that could be made.
It's a funny pun. You're right. It's a funny pun and a play on All In, but like it doesn't quite have the same like marketing ring to it. And I'm a little annoyed. Like it just sounds slightly off. It just bothers me like unnecessarily. Sure. Like they probably could have come up with a better name, and like the dissonance between the meaning of All In and like going all out, but not having that like particular juxtaposition used in any of the marketing. Just like it feels like something's missing, and it bothers me. But like that's just me personally. It's not like I promote professional wrestling shows for a living, and I have any skin in the game. I'm sure the show will be fantastic.
I want to see this. How would you promote one?
How would I promote All Out? Well, it starts. That episode of The Simpsons with the crazy old man who says that where Krusty is on the streets, saying that he'll drop his pants for food.
Oh, yeah. And that one's doing it for free.
I'll do it for free. And there's a crazy old guy singing a song with the pants down around his ankles.
And he got on TV, and he got his own dancers.
Yeah, see, it works. So you have proven history.
Great old Mary, she ain't what she used to be. So good.
Unfortunately, The Simpsons already did it, so I wouldn't really say that it's original. But there are no original
They did ideas. Everything. That was the whole point of that South Park episode.
Exactly. In wrestling, there are no original ideas. Everything is a takeoff of something that somebody else has already done. We made a big deal about how Bray Wyatt, when we talked about him, was just a take on Waylon Mercy from Cape Fear. And about how Chris Jericho took one of his most famous epithets from Mad Max, right?
Yeah.
So
the Ayatollah of Rock and Roll, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. We had a discussion about this. You reminded me that was from that movie.
Okay, yeah.
As begrudging as it is for me to admit that you were correct about something.
Cheeky.
You remind me every time I'm wrong.
I certainly do. So you deserve to be reminded when you're right too, right?
Well, at least you're fair. Biting, but fair.
I give you a fighting chance, not necessarily equitable.
I mean, we need to get entertainment out of this somehow, and if it's all in one direction, you don't know where the highs and lows are going to come from. So,
all right. So, other than that, I'd just like to go quickly over, since we've already been doing this for the half hour that I promised it wouldn't take.
You knew this was going to happen. Come on.
Yeah, I did. I'm not sorry for anything. I don't know if you.
I'm not sorry either. Go for it.
My last topic of expertise would be that Magic the Gathering had its first esports Mythic Championship. So previously, all of their tournaments have either been invitationals or they've been like the traditional paper Magic. But today in the Mandalay Bay Casino in Las Vegas, they launched their first competitive Mythic Championship for Arena, their new online product, intended to be their new esports initiative.
Okay.
The event looked fantastic. The only thing that it felt like it was really missing, was an audience. So it used to be that
that's important.
Yeah, the paper Pro Tours they tend to have like 400 to 500 people there, and that was even after like for a time they were public events. So you come in, you could get like art signed or participate in side events while the pros were participating in the Pro Tour. After a while, they made it invitation only, so that there wasn't this like whole sideshow. But still, you'd usually have like all the teams of all the players who were competing in the top 8, hanging out in the stands, and all their like friends and supporters, and they would all cheer for the big players, as the event was broadcast. And here, you only had like the 60 people who were invited, so like they all showed up at the end to root in the finals. But for most of the tournament, it was just like this big empty, like sports style stage, and they had like the pyro, which is pretty cool because even the WWF doesn't do pyro anymore; it's too expensive. But like they would have their
we don't even have him on the show anymore because of that.
Pyro, yeah.
Yeah, he's way too expensive to have on.
He's too rich for our blood.
We can't book him.
Yeah, we always
anymore.
Have to pay the fire extinguisher.
So we couldn't compete with Wizards of the Coast. Every time they have a player come out, they have literal Pyro Jack Frost come out and announce them, and he like just kind of like dances in the background while they're sitting at
I'd love to see that.
So would I. I really wish that was the case.
I would pay him money for that.
I would also pay him money, but unfortunately, he's not the one that we have to pay to see that happen. The event, by most metrics, was very successful. As I read, that they had 127,000 peak viewers on Twitch. If you discount what's called embedded views, which is just where like the channel plays and like embedded in something where you don't even know that you're like purposely watching it, the real number was probably somewhere between 30 and 50,000, which is obviously a big step down from 127, but it would still make it the most visible Magic tournament on Twitch of all time.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that sounds like a lot for a non-mainstream event, which obviously they're trying to make it that
sure.
So, but to me that's big for this type of thing.
Mm-hmm. So I discussed during a previous episode a little bit some of the more recent controversies that like the Wizards of the Coast has not been particularly open in terms of like how the 32 players who are continually invited to these events as professional Magic players, how they like rotate. How like what are their risks? Like who gets? Yeah, how do they lose their spot?
They basically, if they like you, they invite you.
So
that's what it's basically coming down to.
Substantially more complicated than that, I think, at least at this point. So the MPL players, when they were originally chosen, were literally just the top 32 players who agreed to be streamers. So they were all in the top 40 under the previous ranking system. So it was pretty easy to tell why people were part of the MPL. It all made sense. They were all part of the traditional Magic the Gathering sort of grinding system. And it was only the couple of sort of last-minute replacements that they had to come up with on very short notice because someone left for some reason. One player quit. One player was fired for cheating. One player was fired for for sexual harassment, basically. And so they came up with replacements on very short notice because this is a product they're required to stream 10 hours a week, so they have to come up with someone immediately. So those players were not chosen from the grinding system because in the organized play sense, the list of points has now like totally been wiped. So it doesn't really even make sense to go and pick the next 3 people in the old leaderboard either because the leaderboard is continually in flux. But they also got rid of a couple of incentives. One of which is they used to give a plane ticket to the Pro Tour, which is now the Mythic Championship, if you won a qualifier to one of the paper ones, and now they don't do that anymore. So there was a bit of a hubbub recently because a bunch of players who qualified wound up having to set up GoFundMe pages for basically for their travel, which is a little weird. It's not like it's not really a new thing because like a lot of Magic players who used to stream would always just like accept donations from fans all the time. Like fans would usually happily
but it's the platform. Like GoFundMe is usually used for like generally for things that people really need.
Well, so that's sort of an emergent thing. You can be sure that when GoFundMe, started up, they were not intended to be like the #1 healthcare provider in America, right? That is an emergent phenomenon.
No, but that's where people tend to find this kind of stuff. It's like charity cases rather than like a tip jar kind of deal,
So, yeah, that's what makes this so difficult. Is that like, well, there's a couple of aspects to it. For one, like winning a major Magic tournament, if you're trying to become a Magic player, is a big deal. Like, that visibility launches you into the community. It gets you a continuous fan base. It basically allows you to turn Magic into a lifestyle, which for a lot of people is a big deal. It's what they're aspiring to do. It's a make or break a lot of the time. And if you just can't go because you can't afford it, then that will forever be denied to you, and it just makes you feel like you should never be able to even qualify for Magic, for like these big tournaments anymore. Even though you're clearly competent enough, even though you're like clearly like personally capable of success, which also means that you have something to offer to the community. You're locked out by gatekeeping, by financial gatekeeping, which is really unfortunate. The other problem is that traditionally, in low-level Magic tournaments like this, a lot of the time, the top 4 or top 8 players will negotiate a prize split, which makes Magic tournaments sort of less for like the people who are like not quite good enough to maintain a career out of it but do want to like consistently travel and play, makes it less risky because the tournaments aren't always all or nothing. And the problem with that is that this is obviously public information. So if you compete in a tournament that had a $1,000 prize pool, and then you agree to a prize split with 3 to 7 other people, and then you go on GoFundMe and you ask for $2,000 to go to Barcelona, which is where the next tournament is, then like people will use that against you socially, which is unfortunate because for people who really need the money, even if the prize by itself isn't enough to give you to let you subsist, that will always be used against you socially, which is really unfortunate. And like I hate that's the case. Someone put it really succinctly that and generally speaking, in American society, you're continually asked to choose between subsistence and satisfaction, and this current setup means that players who are not of high means, like, have to take all the risk onto themselves. They will not be allowed to accept prize splits, which has social consequences on top of that, because you're basically pissing off the other 3 people who would normally take a prize split with you, by taking away some of their equity. So you have to choose between like the social stigma of making the players who like participate in your local tournaments angry at you because you can't ever prize split. Hopefully they'll be understanding, but you never know for sure. Or the social stigma of having to go onto the general internet and ask for extra money because you can't afford to go to the tournament, and like to have the prize split be used against you by like people who run your local tournaments. And I don't want to blame anyone in particular in the community for doing this. This is entirely Wizards of the Coast's fault for knowing this would happen. And yet choosing to take away the free plane tickets anyway. And I wish that people would push the pressure up the ladder more often. But like what really tends to happen is that complaining to a large corporation for most people is exceedingly frustrating. And a lot of the time you don't ever really expect anything to happen. It requires an organized effort. So,
most of the time, the problem is the people that would hear you would be able to affect a decision never hear it. That's like a big part of the problem. Like you complain to people on the front lines, and they are buried under levels of management before it gets to a decision maker. And they may be tone deaf as to just how big a problem it could be, because they're not entrenched in like the social media aspect. They're not watching the social media necessarily. Whereas somebody who operates the Twitter will know exactly what's going on, but they're basically just following orders.
It's also that like this is entirely planned a lot of the time. That people know that like people continuously hear, when they're longtime fans of a given product, that people know that it requires organized effort to enact change in like a large corporation that does something that you're not happy about. And for one, they feel bad because they're entrenched fans who aren't like who are told that like retention of like their fan base is like not profitable a lot of the time. That like doing things for people who are already part of the intrinsic fan base, like keeping them is pretty easy. Retention is usually pretty high. And when you make a decision that makes like entrenched fans unhappy, you know, like roughly you can estimate as a large company how many people you're going to lose versus like reapportioning that money to like a blue ocean style strategy where you go looking for other fans to bring in. Usually that strategy is considered to be profitable, and everything else is just looked at like numbers. And like people feel really bad about that, but they don't take it out on the company because they're already entrenched. It's a high opportunity cost for them to stop doing something that they love. It's a big emotional cost, you know. Sure. So you take it out on people in the community who you feel like are being serviced by this, and a lot of the time that means like it makes the community toxic and less inclusive because a lot of the time, at least especially now in the current political climate, a lot of the people who are being targeted specifically by these like new ad campaigns are people who are not traditionally seen as gamers. So that basically means like anybody who isn't like a white guy, you know, and it makes your community look really shitty because it exposes how shitty some of the people already are. And we're seeing that right now in Magic, and it's really unfortunate. So as part of this big Mythic Arena Championship, Wizards of the Coast has decided to invite 16 discretionary people. Basically, this totally made up 16 invites. Not that they're like random people or anything, but they were all people who didn't qualify through any of the traditional systems. They were former Hall of Famers, popular streamers, people who had achieved some like small measure of success, but didn't have the capacity to participate in like the tournament ecosystem that would normally qualify you for one of these big tournaments. And so when you know you continuously over and over again on social media, on Reddit, on the major news sites for Magic, kept hearing about how, you know, people were opposed to these these invites that didn't have these non-qualified invites, what people kept calling them. But you never heard people objecting to the people who were like Hall of Famers, like the same people who were always coming to Magic all the time. Mm-hmm. Like, this was an effort specifically to bring audiences and people into Magic who didn't previously play Magic, and to build your community, you have to plant that seed. You know, you have to like give some people who are not part of the grindy, like highly invested Magic community like a chance for them to form those communities for themselves, because obviously something systematic was keeping them out of it. Usually it's just like the toxicity of the existing community. And so it's always those people who got invited for this reason who are the target of all this frustration, and it's disgusting, and I hate it, you know, every time I see it. So I wish that people knew better than to let their community be splintered like this, and to feel like the issue, I guess, is that Wizards of the Coast, by inviting a bunch of like streamers and a bunch of like community ambassadors, makes people who are already grinding feel like now on top of that they have to do a bunch of like brand labor for Magic for free, basically, to go on Twitch or like to go on Twitter or, you know, to go on like all these major sites and to do content promotion for free, you know, in the hopes that they'll be one of the random people selected like for one of these discretionary invites. And there's nothing wrong like with wanting to build a community where people support each other and where people do all this without any hope of recompensation, because usually those are the people who are successful as content creators. They're people like Lotus Prince who would do this anyway for free, you know, and it's nice that you get money to do it, but like mostly he does it because he enjoys playing video games and, like, you know, putting it out on the internet and interacting with people. Same reason we do this podcast. It's not like we are monetarily successful for doing it, because we like doing it. Most people who do it specifically for the hope of reward just burn out like really quickly because the requirements are exceptionally high, you know. And like what makes this so frustrating to me is that you have Wizards of the Coast sitting at the top of this who wants us to do all this like performative consumerism, you know, for free, and they get all the profit off of it. You know, we're basically just doing free marketing for them, and like that's never really the take that people have, and that's what I wish people would talk about more. So I'm happy that the tournament went well. I'm happy that some of the people who are like lower level people are like over the fucking moon, you know, for having their first opportunity to go to a Pro Tour, especially like a really big event like this. Like, and I was just so happy for them. But a lot of the rest of the internet was not very happy for them, and I was not very happy about that.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
All right, so that's my speech. Thank you for giving me 45 minutes of your time. I know I have other stuff to talk about, and some of this is really cool. So
yeah, you like to spill your heart about this kind of topics, and it's the end of the ardor about it is admirable.
Mm-hmm. Well, the good thing about the show is that we all have like converging and diverging interests. So it gives every when each of us is on, we can focus on the things that we're best at and fill in some of the holes in our limited scope. So this is a good thing. Absolutely. So having said that, I'm going to go over some new releases and some recently released games before we close out our week, just to kind of bring things a little bit back to normalcy, and also just have a quick discussion on a few of them. So a big release last week was Bloodstained. That was probably the biggest high-profile release. And a lot of people were really, really worried about this in particular, especially because so many Kickstarters had gone bad, and kind of the feeling about the beta was pretty underwhelming. But for all intents and purposes, everybody's really loving it for the most part. So that doesn't mean also that the game will continue to get better, because they've promised many updates and DLC things later. So this is definitely a living game for sure. But I'm glad to hear that the reaction is generally positive for a game that people have been really looking forward to as a spiritual successor to probably. A lot of retro gamers top 10 game of all time. Symphony of the Night is a classic in every sense of video game history. So it's great that this was made a reality and that it turned out positively. So I have not had a chance to play it, unfortunately. This is one that I am in particular very much looking forward to. I've been a big Castlevania fan for my entire life, and to see this come out is a great thing, and to have it not be disappointing. So I will give my impressions of it in the near future, when I get a chance to muck around in it a bit, but I'm generally looking forward to it. Most of the negative stuff is just logistical stuff, there was a patch that made things really inconvenient, that kind of thing. But just the way the patch was rolled out kind of messed things up a little bit, but then kind of fixed it. So it wasn't like a gameplay issue or a level design issue or an enemy design issue, which is a serious problem in my book. So I don't know if you guys have any quick thoughts about that before we move on to smaller stuff.
Well, I'm just happy that there is a new Castlevania game out. Basically, Metroidvania style game out, with basically from the original author of the game.
Sure.
And with no, basically, what do you call this? Committee sort of chewing on it.
Sure. And they've been very coy about its relationship to Castlevania. They've kind of have been kind of referencing things, but kind of not, because of the litigative properties of that. But
sure.
It's real cool.
Sometimes it's important to kind of reel back the artistic spirit. Well,
sure.
I'm curious about it. I have on my Steam wishlist. If I ever get any kind of funds together, I might look into it.
There you go. How about you, OldManStompy? Any thoughts on it?
I'm in the same position as you. I backed the game, and I believe I backed the physical copy. I just haven't had a chance to actually go back to where I had it shipped and pick it up.
Yeah.
So I could have been playing it for a week, which is unfortunate. I found out the game looked like it's doing so well. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I may even double dip on it. I got it for Steam because at the time that was the platform that I was playing a lot on. But I may just buy a Switch copy as well, just because that's where I play my games primarily now.
It's very on brand for you.
Yeah, double dipping, unfortunately. But I've been doing it a lot less nowadays, so thankfully, because when I do buy when a new game comes out, I buy it with the Switch in mind, rather than buying it on PC first and then going off. But another couple great games have been released. Another one that a lot of people are really loving is My Friend Pedro, which is a release from Devolver Digital, who's really been hitting their games out of the park recently. They've been doing a really great job, and this game looks fantastic. I can't wait to play it. I bought this as well. And I can't wait to play it. Some people are even claiming it to be like the best like stylish trippy action game since Hotline Miami, which is really
it looks like
cool sign.
It looks like a Hotline Miami game, just instead of top down, it's platforming.
Yeah, it just like if you ever see it in motion, it just looks like action ballet. Like it just looks so like Mad Max mixed with like a 2D action platformer plus ballet. It just looks so amazing and a Max Payne. Yeah, with the bullet time kind of effects. Yeah.
Mad Max suddenly brought in. Wait, there's car rampage involved.
Yeah.
Probably, but. Okay.
But I can't wait. I mean, I love that kind of trippy story and trippy aesthetic, and I love like Hitman style stories. Plus, I love the kind of physics manipulation that's going on with this game.
Just as a reminder, My Friend Pedro is actually a remake of a game that you can play for free right now on Flash on Concrete.
I didn't realize it was a remake of a Flash game. Wow.
It's on Congregate. It's got its own achievements. It's been around for a while. I saw it in a reply to one of the announcements that the game was coming out, and for a lot of people already playing the Flash demo, more or less, sold them on the game. So it's worth trying.
Okay, cool.
I heard.
I mean, there's a storied history of that kind of thing. I mean, even Hollow Knight kind of came out as kind of that. Like their prototype or proto game was
Portal is one of the most famous, right? And our Back Drop was originally a free Flash game that was much worse than Portal, but still. yeah, and there were all the guys that from the Behemoth originally made Flash games as well. In fact, they were the higher ups of Newgrounds to begin with, I believe. Yeah. There's some storied history of this kind of thing. Spelunky is another big one that started off as a Flash game, right? So there's another one. I think Fancy Pants Adventure is like this platformer that started out as a Flash series.
I know.
Sure.
Recently on Steam, I found a game called Super Fight, which was on Newgrounds as well.
Yeah. Frog Fractions is another one. So
that is, I would not use Frog Fractions as an archetype for anything. Like, yes, technically it was a free Flash game, but good luck trying to figure out that game's release history. Or good luck even.
You probably
couldn't
even get a straight answer out of the developer.
If you did not explicitly know how to buy Frog Fractions 2 on Steam, you would never fucking find it.
It's so funny that he's kind of trolling his own wallet by doing that, by making it so goddamn obtuse. There's even going to be a package release of the Trojan Horse game that he's calling it. So Glitter Mitten Grove.
What I'm waiting for is a real release of the Tiger Electronics Dark Souls game that was inside Frog Fractions 2.
I don't know anything about Frog Fractions 2, luckily, because I've kind of stayed away from it because I really want to play it. But that is to the extent of my knowledge of anything that's going on in that game. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
But I should move on if we want to get any small bits of stuff here. I just quickly want to also say that Rolling Gunner was released on Switch in US and Europe this week. So this had previously been released in Japan. It is a console port of a Dojin shmup that became very popular. It's probably the most popular Dojin shmup since Crimson Clover, which is widely considered to be one of the best shmups ever made. It's not even just like one of the best like Dojin shmups. Dojin meaning like it's most likely made by one person or maybe a second person.
I would say best bullet hell, but I wouldn't call it best shoot or not.
I've heard a lot of people from that community say that Crimson Clover is one of their favorites. I mean, that's up for debate, obviously, but it's still a great game. Rolling Gunner is a fantastic game, and it also has a lot of options for beginners. So it is not a bullet hell game. It is more of a traditional horizontal shmup. And in doing so, it's less alienating than a lot of games in the genre, including Crimson Clover, which is actually one of the better ones, but for this kind of thing. But I would say that if you are a casual like a shoot 'em up player, Rolling Gunner is a great game. It's a great game as it is. It's a lot of fun, and you could probably play through it, in one of the lower modes. Without too much trouble, and they kind of teach you how to play it, and they teach you the scoring mechanics. And most of these games have very obtuse, very arcane scoring elements that you need to read an entire guide on, and learn very heavily before you can even play the game with any reasonable amount of skill. This game is far easier in that sense. Even if you do want to graduate to just going from playing just to survive and beat the game to playing for score, which is ultimately the goal. So a lot of people really love this game, and it for good reason. I bought the original PC release of this, and I'm glad that this not only has a console release, but also a mainstream English release as well. And I think the release is only $20, which is a bargain for the level of quality. Also out this week, Judgment is coming out. The next game by the Ryogakutoku studio, or the Yakuza studio. I'm very much looking forward to this game. I don't have much to say on it other than what we have in previous weeks, but I'm just looking forward to it. And also Mario Maker 2. I don't have anything also new to talk about on that, but I am very much looking forward to it. When it comes to these type of games and any game that really has a creative element to it, I like the fact that people can make these kinds of things. I just don't have the time to pour into it that I wish I did. But I will gladly use it as a vehicle to play other people's creations. And also considering that they are putting a lot of content in the game up front, made by the game developers, I'm really excited to see what they do with all the new options, and I just love a Mario game in general, so I'm really looking forward to this. And I'm also looking forward to the fact that I think a lot of people have learned since the last one that interesting level design doesn't always need an excruciating amount of challenge either. I think there is that end of those kinds of things, but a lot of people were towards the tail end of the lifespan of the creative process of the first game. A lot of people were just making pleasurable experiences, which is really what a lot of the developers try to do in the first place, rather than just do a Mario Lost Levels kind of approach, where they try to kill, murder your soul while playing, a massacre, kind of thing.
Meat Boy, or I want to be the guy.
Yeah, exactly. A more casual experience, but pleasurable, which is what I'm after, really, most of the time. I don't want to be, going through mazes and all kinds of bullshit. I kind of just want to play something that I feel is original and fun. So, and the only other thing that I really quickly wanted to touch on before we move on, we had some other things, but we're running out of time. I quickly wanted to say that I had a really great, and this is one of those things where I don't believe companies hear enough positive kinds of stuff. You hear a lot of whining on the internet and that kind of thing, but I wanted to go over a positive experience that I had with limited run games. They get a lot of flack from people that are upset that they couldn't buy certain games and that kind of thing, and then that's valid, but I did want to go over the fact that I had a really great experience with them. I bought John Romero's Sigil recently from them, which is the unofficial extra episode to Doom, the original Doom, and it came in a really nice physical box, and it came with the game and a developer video and the Buckethead soundtrack, the premium version of the soundtrack, the non-MIDI CD-based soundtrack, all on a USB stick that's shaped like an old floppy disk. So when I received this and I originally put it into my computer, when I clicked on a file, the entire thing became corrupted. So therefore rendering the entire thing useless to me. I could not play the video, I couldn't play the game, I couldn't do anything. So I was upset because this is the kind of thing that won't be produced forever, and the physicality of it is is really special to me, at least. And I opened up a customer service query with them, and the agent was super nice. Apparently, I had unknowingly gotten the head of customer service, who a person named Viz, I believe her name is, and I talked to a limited run representative actually over the weekend at Too Many Games in Oaks, Pennsylvania, this weekend. But I told them about the experience as well, and they said it was great that you got her because she's really awesome, is what they said. So I just want to put it out there that I had a really good experience. They sent me another one with no charge. It came very quickly. And they said they hand tested it, which of course I believe them. And when I got it, it worked fine. And they told me I didn't even need to send back the original faulty USB stick. So I just want to quickly shout that out because you hear all kinds of negative things about experiences and how things went. But especially when somebody went out of their way to help me, I like to showcase it. So it was a good experience, a very good and positive one. So I hope to go over a lot of their newly announced titles probably next week, because Lotus is really into the limited run releases. I'm casually into them. So I want to give him a platform to talk about the ones he's excited about. So without I'm pretty much done. Does anybody else have any final things that they need to say here for Reactive this week?
I got two.
Okay, please do.
It's not new release, but Void Bastards is out, which is sort of this scavenger type of shooter, similar to, like, it's sort of a roguelite, with a mix of faster than light. Only it's more.
Oh, okay.
It's like instead of ship battle, you sort of system shock yourself through abandoned spaceships to scrounge for resources.
I always got the feeling that that FTL kind of had a board game-esque feel to it, just because of the way that it played. Would you say that it has a similar kind of feel to it?
No, it's just that you're moving from ship to ship to ship.
Okay.
Overview. The main meat of the game is more like System Shock, with a little bit more comedy. And
so first person combat, but mostly adventure.
Sort of
style.
Resource management and survival.
Okay.
And strategy.
Gotcha.
I can recommend it for those who like to play a little bit more easy Cerebral, and for those who don't like to play with Cerebral, I would like to recommend Amid Evo, which is finally came out on full. like all the episodes are now available. So grab your battle axe and carve your own epoch.
Nice. How about you, OldManStompy? Any further mentions?
Actually, like one kind of funny aside that I just noticed like while we were recording this podcast. So in Magic the Gathering, there's a guy in the lore, not really deep in the lore, called Curse Guy. So there's a card called Curse. It's an enchantment that you give to a player that like bestows some negative effect on them, like pretty ordinary effect. But there's a bunch of them that all depict like the same guy with like something really horrible happening to him, and he's become like slightly mamified in the fandom as Curse Guy. And like people are like really waiting for him to get his own card.
Oh yeah. Even in the older sets, it had like the same guy like falling over and like succumbing to whatever was going on that card.
That's true for the old time, but this is specifically a guy who's been in like a bunch of recent cards. Like they call him Curse Guy, and it turns out he looks exactly like the guy who just won the most recent Mythic Championship. So I guess he had a happy ending.
Hint.
Wow. That's amazing. All right. Well, any final words here, guys?
Nope.
Okay, great.
Thanks for watching for us and not any of the many other better podcasts out there.
Watching,
waiting. But yeah, as always, we love our community, so everything's in jest. So we really have to thank you for your level of interactivity and the amount of encouragement lately. We got a lot of thumbs ups on the last week or two of podcasts. Probably the most we've gotten in a while. So I really want to thank everybody. It seems like everybody's really enjoying our content. So I have to thank everybody for the encouragement. That is the show for this week. Please remember to subscribe to the Corrective Consciousness YouTube and SoundCloud pages. While there, please give us thumbs ups, likes, and 5-star ratings on iTunes. It helps promote and spread awareness of the show, and any bit of encouragement helps keep the show going. You can also catch us on Thursdays for our sister podcast, Corrective Consciousness, the podcast where we explore the inanity of pop culture. Finally, you can friend me as vysethebold on Steam, PSN, Xbox Live, Twitter, Switch, and Battle.net.
You can find me as OldManStompy on most major gaming and social media networks, except for Twitter, where I'm OldManStompy CC, thanks to this podcast, and my inability to remember the password to the original OldManStompy Twitter account. And I'm also OldManStompy on Magic Arena, so please feel free to pass me a direct challenge.
You can find me on Skype, Steam, and on Discord on the Lair of the Crocosphere, and on recently on Castles at Orban.
Okay, great. So we will catch everybody on Thursday for another episode of Corrective Consciousness, where we will celebrate the resurgence of Neon Genesis Evangelion with a discussion of our favorite animes. So be prepared for a weeb episode on Thursday. So we'll catch you then.
Cheers.
Good evening.